When trying to total and summarize data, there are three functions that all are part of the same family with one another. The first being sum, the second being SUMIF, which is really like the grandfather function, to SUMIFS, which is the more modern function we should be using when we want to categorize and summarize segments of the data. Let's start with the sum function. The sum function is very easy to understand. It simply totals all the data that you have in front of you in the selection area. So in this instance, in cell I6, we can go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, click the Math and Trig drop-down menu, and choose the sum function. That being your basic adding of the data. So I click on sum and I highlight all the cells that I'd like to summarize. As you can see, it very often pre-selects some amount of data, and we often need to remove that. And we are now going to select from cell G6 down to cell G30, coming to a total of $1.5 million, and then click OK. Now, unfortunately, this does not include any cells that get filled in immediately below. If, for example, I made another record right down here for $67,000 and hit enter, you can see that the total still comes to $1.5 million. And on top of that, it gets a small green corner and this exclamation point icon, letting you know that it's omitting the adjacent cells. To solve this problem, don't use the cells as a reference, but instead convert your data into a table. You do that, and I'm going to go ahead and remove that extra row down here by clicking onto the data here in cells C5 through G30. On the Insert tab at the top of the screen, you click on Table, which is the third button from the left, and you click OK. You can choose from many different table styles up at the top of the screen, including, here in the top left-hand corner, one that doesn't have any additional table styles whatsoever. And when we choose this, we can see very clearly that there is a tiny corner right down here in the bottom right of our data that signifies how far down the table goes. Now, I would always recommend clicking onto the dataset, clicking on the Table Design tab, and making sure that you give the table a good table name. As you can see, this table is called Table 1, which is a terrible name because it doesn't tell us anything. And so here, for example, I will type in TBL sales sum, meaning, of course, that it's the sales table and it's for the sum function specifically. And now, when we perform the exact same action, going to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, going to Math and Trig and choosing the sum function from the dropdown, and then we go in and highlight all the cells from G6 to G30, you can see that that reference changes to be the name of the table, in this case, TBL sales sum, and then within that, the name of the column, in this case, total sale, giving us the same $1.5 million. But when I click OK, and I click just below the bottom of the table and type in that $67,000 like we did a moment ago, you can see here that that corner slides down, the table has gotten bigger, and we can see that the total sales now comes to $1.6 million instead of 1.5. Now, very often when we're trying to summarize this data, we'd like to categorize the data and then summarize it by that categorization. So for a very long time in Excel, we had a function called SUMIF, which allows us to calculate things based on one criteria. So for example, in cell J6, I might want to get the total sales for the product called Teamfire. I go to cell J6, go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, and on the Math and Trig drop-down menu, I choose SUMIF. As you can see, it falls just between sum and SUMIFS on the drop-down. And when I choose this, I get three possibilities. Possibility number 1, what is the range of cells that are going to be compared? So in this instance, we know that we're looking at the products. So the range here is the range of cells that contains all those products, F6 through F30. And the criteria is the cell that contains the product that we are specifically looking for, in this case cell I6 or TeamFire. Now the final field in this SUMIF function is what is the column of cells that are then being added up. And when we choose the G column here, in the same way that we selected the F column, we can see that $354,000 worth of sales can be attributed to TeamFire. Then we click OK. And if we choose to change the name from TeamFire to WatchPost, you can see that that's $415,000. Now it's interesting, when you get into using dates for your criteria, you can't just say, well, let me say it this way. You can say, I'm looking for this date, which will find you all the sales of exactly 2/28/2025. But I would say most of the time, instead of exactly 2/28/2025, what you're looking for is a date range. Now you'll notice here that I've just gone with the end date because in order to actually specify a full range, I would have to use the SUMIFS function to allow for 2 or more criteria. But here, what I can do is I can choose 2/28/2025 as the criteria, but then I would be more specific and say that the date is either before 2/28/2025 or after. So let's do this again. We click on the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, the Math and Trig drop-down menu, and we find SUMIF without the S at the end, allowing for a range to be tested. The range here would be the sale date range, and then the criteria. As I was saying earlier, if we just choose the cell that says 2/28/2025, it'll only find those sales that happen on that date. Instead, we either want the things before or after 2/28/2025. And here you need to know that all dates are actually number values. So any dates that are after 2/28/2025 are larger than that, and any dates that are before 2/28/2025 are smaller. So let's say in this instance we want to find everything greater than. So we might put in a greater than symbol. But now how are we going to refer to cell I12? If we simply click on cell I12, I want you to notice what's about to happen here when I click into Sum Range. You see how it's put the quotation marks around the entire thing. This would cause it to break because what it's saying is that the date has to be greater than I12, which is nonsensical. We want it to refer to the value that's in cell I112, and then we want to add on to that the greater than symbol. So to accomplish that, what we do instead for the criteria is as follows. We put in open quotation marks before the greater than symbol. We put a closing quotation marks after the greater than symbol. And then we use an ampersand to concatenate that together with the value of the date range. Now, don't think that this is correct because currently it's trying to add the dates together. And of course, that's not correct. We want it to add the total sales together. So we highlight all of that, and it says that everything that is greater than 2/28/2025 comes to $570,000. And click OK. If, for example, I were to type in, let's say, 3/30/2025 and hit enter, notice what happens here. Any dates after 3/30/2025, that's only April 1st and that $57,000. But if I said, again, 2 28 of 2025, then that's all the dates after February 28th, and that's all those values. Now, I find myself never choosing the SUMIF function because the SUMIFS function is its logical successor. It allows for you to add things with more than one criteria, but also add things that do only have one criteria. So finally here we'll click the SUMIFS function tab. And you can see here that I might want to get the total sales for Teamfire in North America. So I go to my Formulas tab at the top of the screen. I go to the Math and Trig drop-down menu and find SUMIFS on that drop-down, and specify that the sum range is the G column. You'll notice here that SUMIFS is structured differently from the SUMIF function in that it starts with the sum range instead of the criteria range. The criteria range instead comes second. And in this instance, it's the first criteria range followed by the second criteria range. It doesn't really matter whether you choose that the region or the product is the first criteria range. So here I will highlight the entire E column from E6 through E30 and click on the criteria of North America. Now, currently, this tells us that the total sales for all of North America come to $890,000, but that is not what we are specifically looking for. We go to criteria range 2, and we say, actually, we are also looking for a specific product. So we select the F column, and we compare it against Teamfire. So we select cell J6 for criteria 2, and that brings our total result down to $261,000. Click OK, and there is our result. If we change the region to Europe here, you see there are $80,000 worth of sales for Teamfire in Europe, and if we change the product to Watch Post, we see there were $136,000 of Watch Post sales in Europe. And when we come to the date ranges, it's kind of interesting. It's on the same column in this instance, when is the sale date, but we are going to use two separate criteria for the start and the end. So we go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, Math and Trig drop-down menu, and find the SUMIFS function. We grab the sum range of the total sale column and the criteria range 1 of the sale date, matching up with the same range here. So G6 through G30 and C6 through C30. And criteria 1 is, as we talked about earlier, quotation marks. Greater than or equal to, close quotation marks, ampersand, and we click on the start date. So the start date is smaller, 2/1 of 2025. So we want things that are greater than that date, after that date. We see that comes to $892,000. And now further, we go to criteria range 2, select the same column with the sale date in it, and for criteria 2, quotation marks, less than or equal to, close quotation marks, ampersand, and select the end date. And so those dates that fall between 2/1 of 2025 and 2/8 of 2025 have a grand total of $322,000 of sales. I hit OK, and that's the result.